Katrina, like, wonder if you could take us through like this process arc, sort of our proposed, like how we start to think differently about search.
Right. So specifically, I want to talk about it from the search committee's lens, because we talk about like this little arc and all of these vertical lines that come down on all these different parts of the process. We talk about that in terms of like a relational investment that the search committee is making in these processes. And so you can see, there might be places where you're like, oh, once it gets out in the world, or for example, in this like posting and sourcing space, we don't really have that much to do. We'll be like coasting until it collects. Well, that might be true, for example, but it might be that we're actively engaged in sharing through our social medias. We're actively engaged in sending emails or having conversations with people. We're actively engaged in what is being posted and how it's being posted. And so there is it's a full court press. That you are what we've heard is that people are often surprised by how labor intensive a search like this can be because of all of the ways that we try to reimagine how we're doing. And so, for example, from engagement, you're watching this video, you may decide, there's something really juicy here that I want to participate in or experience. And if that's you, we're super stoked because we think that if you experience an alternative like this, then it'll make it really hard to go back to doing the dusty version again next time. And the more people that have experience in doing something like this, the more significant shifts you'll see in how the organization recruits and handles hiring processes and then subsequently onboarding processes and things like that. And so the engagement piece, we talk about a committee agreement. We talk about what are those values and principles that are really going to ground the way we work together. What can we honor and what can we share with candidates and with the rest of the organization that we're committed to? And how do we uphold that throughout the whole process? The position description. So just the example on this one is that, I often, or Tim and I often talk to a lot of members of the organization. And the reason that we do that, you could talk to, 5 or 10 people and maybe get some good themes, some great insights from people. But it's the nuance and the number of times that things come up and the different ways people talk about, this underlying issue that might be clustered together. Sometimes that shifts and changes, or it gives a great basis for a conversation, a little bit of dialogue around what we're hearing and what we think that means. But the other thing that it does is it offers access into this process at a very early stage. And so even if people aren't a member of the search committee, you still have a chance to input into it. You still have a chance to share how your role or your connection sort of comes into this. And so you feel like you're a part of it. It builds trust with the rest, starts to build trust with the rest of that process. And so it's a responsibility we take throughout the arc to continue to build that trust with people who aren't involved in the search committee. And so from a committee member perspective, that may mean checking in with your team to see if anybody has any questions about what's being shared about the process and bringing that back, just so that we make sure that if there are ways that people can continue to input as the process moves forward, that we're creating those invitations, those opportunities for people to share what questions they'd ask or contribute some scenarios that are meaningful to them that we can then consider how to bring into the process. And so in the beginning, we're using that consultation to shape the position description and the framing of the role. But as we go through, we're really going to be, at different stages of this, at posting and sourcing. How do we understand the kinds of candidates that we want to attract to this search? Who knows those folks? How can we invite people to share connections in a way that feels meaningful to them, safe to them, and also exciting? The interview piece is really fascinating. So typically there are like a bunch of questions. Tim talked about if you were a kitchen utensil, what kind of utensil would you be? The kind of Google creative questions that I still get asked about. I mean, I like all the time. So what's the wackiest question you've ever asked? And then it's a step in saying, well, why are we asking those wacky questions? And so this is where interviews connect with the posting description. We try to focus on what are key anchors of the role. And how do we distinguish key anchors, maybe from the knowledge, skills, and abilities that the person needs to have? And then how, throughout the interview process, are we holding ourselves accountable to understanding how candidates meet the key anchors of the role, how we bring their knowledge, skills, and abilities into the process? And so question design is co-creation. It's what are we trying to learn very specifically in this interview? How do we ask very specific questions that get what we need to know? Because there's nothing worse than asking a bunch of questions to candidates and then using 2 of those responses to craft your answer or make your judgment on them. So we have valuable time with candidates. We have valuable limited time with search committee members. We need to make sure that we're getting what we need from each of those instances that we're bringing people together. And that takes conversation and investment and co-creation time with the different committee members. Tim, I'm going to pause there.
Yeah.
I just love you to add or respond to what I've shared so far from that lens.
I really appreciate the visual that you've created with this slide. With the longer the line is, the more work it will likely ask of everyone as part of that search. And you included the piece about the sourcing. That often is the one where people get really surprised. Like what we're trying to do is change the way people like recruit, source, hire, onboard, and ways to do that are to push against the way it typically works. Typically, you post a job posting, and then you wait for people to like respond. And you might share it on the socials or do that sort of mass email to like everyone in your address book to be like, hey, if anyone knows of this thing, like let us know. But the reason that line is so long is because when we think about search, we think of it as a marketing campaign. And so if you approached search like you do, like a search like you do, like marketing your season or your show or your product, whatever it might be, like there's a lot that goes into that. It's not just, we posted one ad in the paper or like we did this one thing on Instagram and like now we're just going to hope people buy our tickets or buy our product. No, it's like how, if we're but one moment in someone's day, like where do we need to keep layering this on and like evolving it and give people new information and then in ways that people want to share and people want to engage in it before they make a decision to apply or not. And so that's why that line is like the longest, along with like a couple others at that stage. But it's like you might be sending out 200 emails, to individual people, which is different than a typical search. And so I really appreciate that. There's commitment that's being asked. This isn't a like 10 meetings and you're done type of thing. And those on the search committee are representing a lot of different people in the organization. And really, as we'll get to, like curating that group, like who's on that, whose voices are included in that, how can other people's voices can be included in the mix, to represent all of these different perspectives and identities and overlap and knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so I think that for me, it's really a helpful thing to be like, okay, so here's where I need to start like calibrating how much time and effort this thing is going to take. So I don't get surprised when we get into posting a sourcing and be like, well, I didn't know this was going to take so much of my time. And so as people are considering like, do I have the bandwidth for this? Am I interested in going that deep into this? I just always appreciate looking at this and sort of getting a different perspective on what's being asked.
It's a different like it's also, I think, we think about traditional search as search consultants tell you how, who you're looking for, and this is the right fit, and you're sort of looking to roles like Tim's and mine differently. And so I think like a really big piece of this is that's not how this works, right? Is that we're partners in this, guiding this process, and also really, really interested in being in a relational dynamic with the search committee, because nobody knows your organization better than you. And so when we come in and sort of say, here's what this looks like, we really do need the committee to lean in, push back, whatever the instincts are, so that we can figure out how to calibrate these activities and what's possible there and how to imagine what that looks like, because it's not cookie cutter from the way we've done it before or the way that you've done it before. There's somewhere in between, likely, that that's going to be the right fit for this organization in this moment.
Yeah, and Katrina, as you were talking about before, it's different, and what can you learn about this that informs other parts of your work?
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about, like, you might be hiring for a staff member, but you could use the same process to recruit and vet board members for an organization. Um, Oftentimes we talk about, like, teach is this a teach to fish, or give a fish moment?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is the solved problem, if you will, and you just need the answer to it? Or is it like we need to build a process here that can then inform in other parts of the organization? And that's why many search firms will be like, here's your candidate of 7 people we vetted, now you decide which one you want. And not like, let's work on this process so that, like, when we're not working together with you, you've built things that live on past us that can inform other searches and other
Mm-hmm.
parts of your organization. And so that's part of why it's much more intensive and rigorous, because you're building, or you're building upon ways that your organization can live your values in policies, practices, initiatives. And so when you think about these different intersections with the way we approach search versus the way other organizations might approach search, or that general traditional search, that's why some of these things take far longer and ask much more of the organization, because it's not just ending up with the one person at the end, but
Mm-hmm.
what do you build, and what do you build on, and how do you reflect those values throughout?